Both prior games have had a Testfire, so it's only fair to assume that Splatoon 3 will have its own Testfire at some point. The Testfires between both games have offered something different from one another while also keeping some aspects the same. Splatoon 1's Testfire was more of a sell on the game as it was a first to Nintendo in the shooter genre. The Testfire acted as a way to convey to everyone how the game plays and how it will work at its core. But with Splatoon 2, since the game was already well established, they were able to make some changes to appeal to those who had come from the previous game. They did this by having the Testfire also act as a Splatfest. So what about Splatoon 3? How could Splatoon 3's Testfire prove to be different once again? How could and should Nintendo address a Splatoon 3 Testfire? So that's what I'm here to talk about today, as these are the things I'd like to see in a Splatoon 3 Testfire. Let's first go over how the Testfires worked, for those that didn't experience it. Both games were similar in the Testfire gave you access to 4 weapons and their kits, and then had differing maps. Splatoon 2's, as mentioned before, was different in that it also had a Splatfest Testfire, while Splatoon 1's was purely normal turf war. Here's where I'd like to start with some changes. The first change being the amount of weapons. It's been consistently 4, with the only change between the games being Splatoon 1 had the Splattershot Jr., where Splatoon 2 swapped that out for the Splat Dualies instead. I'd like to see Splatoon 3's Testfire feature at least one weapon from every main class type. This would include something like 1 Splattershot, 1 Dualie, 1 Charger, 1 Roller, 1 Splatling, 1 Umbrella. You get the point. This way people will be able to check in on their favorite class in this new landscape, and maybe even encourage people to check out classes they didn't normally play just to see how they've changed. Even if it was just one weapon from each class, I think it'd be a pretty good change. Going the distance and adding 2 of each class would be cool, but I consider at least 1 from each to just be a little bit more realistic. Another change I'd like to see is in the modes, specifically having more than 1. Every Testfire has been only Turf War, no ranked allowed. And while I know it makes sense, as then they need to account for ranks in a demo, but what if they didn't? What if you were allowed to queue for ranked as if it was just treated like Turf War? You get put with whoever was playing. This may sound like a bad idea that may discourage new players and people who aren't comfortable with the idea of possibly playing against ranked players, but the option for Turf War is always there, just like it was in full game. They don't have to play ranked, it's just there as an option for those who'd like to. This would also be a very welcome change, as while I do like Turf Wars for being calm and chill, sometimes a good ranked match is what I need. And when the Testfire is only locked to a mode that may not hold attention for long, then it becomes very stale. Though that could also be fixed by adding more weapons like mentioned before. More variety means it'll hold attention longer, but when there's only 4 to pick from and only one mode, then after an hour or 2 you'll begin to feel like you've seen it. If they choose to not include ranked as a part of the Testfire, why not something that can also be done with anybody? Salmon Run. It's already been confirmed to be returning, and Salmon Run is already something that lends itself pretty well to just being played with anybody. I feel like it'd be a good addition to the Testfire, give people a taste of the changes it's made, like the new throwing ability, and let people test their skills against the new boss. There wouldn't even be a need for any prizes attached to it. It could just be a basic game of Salmon Run on the new map. We don't really need any sort of incentive to just check it out. This is another good way to hold people's attention throughout the duration of the Testfire, which actually leads me pretty nicely into my next part, the length of the Testfire. During Splatoon 1's first Testfire, it only lasted 1 hour per session. Then in the second Testfire, it lasted 2 hours per session. Then in Splatoon 2, the sessions went back to only 1 hour for the normal Testfire, then 4 hours for the Splatfest Testfire. What I'd like to see is them changing this Testfire to run an entire weekend. This would not only give people a lot more time to play and experience the game, but also give more time to those who may miss a session due to other obligations. I, for one, missed out on almost every single one of Splatoon 1's Testfires due to having to work. I only got to play one Testfire, and that was it. So allowing a larger window of time for it to be available will make it so a lot more people will be able to play it. This could also enable them to make changes based on the day. So say something like Friday is only Turf War. Then Saturday, Salmon Run unlocks and becomes playable as well. Then on Sunday, Ranked becomes playable until the Testfire ends later that night. This could also act as a good stress test for the game, something the original Testfire for Splatoon 1 actually acted as, and a good test if Nintendo plans to implement their new netcode system into Splatoon 3. I'd like to think that Nintendo would continue to add more into the Testfires, especially since now they have to try and convince people to buy a new on a system that already has the old one. I've talked with other people about this before, but with Splatoon 3 being on the Switch, it means that unless Nintendo does approach things differently and make Splatoon 3 feel different from Splatoon 2, people are only going to constantly compare the two. Splatoon 3 has to feel more different than 2 than 2 had to from 1. It doesn't have the luxury of being on a new platform trying to showcase the leap in potential. Now Splatoon 3 has to show people that Nintendo can take the idea and really expand on it, and I think having a larger scale Testfire to showcase things would be a good way to sell it. Now, it's incredibly likely it'll sell well no matter what. Splatoon has become a pretty huge IP and has been incredibly successful for Nintendo, but there will be a crowd that may not jump to Splatoon 3 if it doesn't make enough changes to feel different. Having a big Testfire is a way for Nintendo to show off what changes they've made to the game and help hook in people that may be wary of possibly buying into another one that may feel the same on the same platform. But what do you guys think? Do you think Nintendo should go bigger with Splatoon 3's Testfire? Do you think there should even be a Testfire? That's another thing I didn't even really go over. Nintendo could be so confident in the game's success alone that they may not feel the need to even do a Testfire this time around. I'd like to hear what everyone else's thoughts are on this, so feel free to leave them below. And with that, I want to thank you all for watching, and I will see you all next time.